Welcome to SOAR, the series on addiction recovery. This series is created by Renaissance Recovery Center. And now, here are your hosts, Steve Brown and Mike Jensen.
Hello and welcome to Renaissance Recovery Center's SOAR, our series on addiction recovery. My name is Mike Jensen. I will be your host today. Steve Brown is celebrating his wife's birthday, and so he is out having fun. I have a lot of things planned for you today. One of the primary things I want to talk about are what are the signs and symptoms of addiction. Also, we're going to get into the balance and imbalance, some of the essential elements of the human condition. We'll get into that. Also, want to go through my recovery process in my own words. That will be just kind of a brief explanation of what I went through as I recovered from alcoholism. And going to end the show today with a story that we've all heard before, but a little bit of a different spin on it. Again, want to let our listeners know that we are Renaissance Recovery Center. We are located centrally in the East Valley in Gilbert. Our primary function is as an intensive outpatient program for drug and alcohol abuse. Our program consists of 4 nights a week where we help people receive the education, the therapy, the counseling, the understanding that they need to help them bridge the gap from addiction and all the negative consequences into recovery and into regaining their life and becoming the person that they can be. We also do individual counseling with all of our IOP participants to ensure and help them, again, to walk this new path of life and to regain their life and everything with it back. I'm a recovering alcoholic. And what that means to me is that today, when I wake up, alcohol is not in my mind. At night, if I'm feeling a little bored, I'm not thinking about drinking. If something in my life goes really wrong or something bad happens, alcohol is not an option for me. But once upon a time, it really was. If the day ended in Y, I would want to drink. If things were too good or too bad, I would want to drink. And even as negative consequences began to happen, I still continued to do this. And the reason for that is I developed a lot of delusions, a lot of ideas as to why I was doing this, why I should continue, why I couldn't live without it. But the fact is that recovery is possible for everyone. And I'm hoping that in today's show, that whether you are a loved one of someone who is addicted or you are someone that is suffering yourself, that this will assist you in beginning to make proper decisions into helping your loved one get their life back, or to make the decision yourself to overcome drug and alcohol addiction. The first thing I want to talk about today is some of the signs and symptoms of addiction. And the very first thing that comes into play is that someone cannot control what they're using. In the case of an alcoholic, a person begins drinking and they cannot stop. And a lot of people have said to me in the past, and I've heard it said to others who have a drinking problem, as an example, they say, why don't you just stop at 2 drinks? Or every time you drink, you end up getting drunk and getting in trouble or doing something stupid. So why don't you just stop? Why don't you just not drink? Well, if alcoholism or drug addiction were solely the result of making choices, or solely the result of logic, then very few people would have any problems. But it goes much deeper than that. In the case of alcohol, I know that if I take a drink, that there is a chemical process that occurs within me, in my biological body, that I will have a physical craving for alcohol. This is referred to as a phenomenon of craving, and essentially it means just this. If I take one drink, because I've taken that drink and that drink is in me, I'm going to very much want another drink, and that will continue. So there's a saying that says a person takes a drink, that drink takes a drink, and the drink takes the person. And, this really is something that's true. So, but the first thing regarding addiction and knowing if someone is addicted or not is that once they begin taking the substance, they can't stop, or perhaps they've stopped for a day or two and continue on, and this never-ending cycle just continues as the negative consequences build up. Okay, so one of the other things that is a sign or symptom of addiction is withdrawal. When someone drinks a lot and their blood alcohol gets high, once they start to come down from drinking, these withdrawal symptoms come into place. In the case of alcohol, it could be profuse sweating, it could be diarrhea, vomiting. There can even be auditory hallucinations. There can be visual hallucinations. A very, very uncomfortable feeling. And alcohol is what most people know about. Alcohol is legal, and they've gone through this before. Maybe they've been hungover and they felt to some degree how crappy you can feel after drinking. If you're an alcoholic and you drink a lot and drink copious amounts of something, and then once you come down, if your blood alcohol goes to say 0.3 or 0.4, which for an alcoholic really isn't that big of a deal, once it goes down to zero, it's a very uncomfortable process. And the same occurs with different types of drugs. Different drugs have different withdrawal symptoms, but the point here in regarding addiction is that once we begin taking our substance, we cannot stop. And once we then are forced to stop, maybe we've run out of the alcohol or the drug, whatever the case may be, we have withdrawal symptoms, and they are very uncomfortable. For the addict, once withdrawal symptoms are in play, they obsess over getting that substance back again. The drinker will want the alcohol. The drug user will want the drug because these withdrawal symptoms are so uncomfortable. And this is something that we see in the recovery field, is that many people, they say to us, I knew I was in trouble. I wanted to stop. I wanted to stop a long time ago. But the problem is that the withdrawal was too painful, and I would stop a day or two, and I was being going crazy, and I couldn't deal with it, and so I went out and I got high again, I got drunk again, and then it starts the whole process over again. Another sign of addiction is that there are legitimate health problems that we know are possible, maybe even having them, yet we continue to use. We'll use smoking as an example. If you're a smoker and if you were diagnosed with emphysema or lung cancer or COPD, and yet you continue to smoke, that doesn't really make a lot of logical sense, does it? But from an addiction viewpoint, it absolutely does. The nicotine and the desire to have nicotine in the body, which is both a physical and a psychological pull, when this happens, the consequences, they just don't do much. So fear of negative consequence really doesn't do much when you're talking about addiction. So where this plays is if you're talking to someone, and let's say they have a drinking problem, or you suspect they do, and you go to a party with them and you both drive and they get drunk, and you say to them, look, let me get you a ride home, and they'll say, no, it's no big deal. I'm not going to get in trouble. I'm just fine. And, I've said this a million times. I've heard it said a million times. There's absolutely no fear, or the fear of getting a DUI just doesn't do much for motivation. Addiction causes delusions that everything is okay, that I'm not as bad as you think I am. I can handle it, all these types of things. Also, when someone is addicted to drugs or alcohol, many of their social or recreational activities change. They change very much because the deeper you get into addiction, it requires so much more time and energy than it ever had before. It progresses. For example, when I was younger, I used to play in softball leagues, and I really enjoyed them, but it got to the point to where I was really getting too drunk before the game started to make any sense. So I decided I wouldn't play. I would just go and drink. And so that's the point, is that if you can identify with this, if you do things like this, you choose your substance over an activity that you previously loved, that is a definite sign that there's a substance abuse issue. And if you're a family member suspecting that a loved one has a problem, and when you see that their activities change, their interests change, or they begin to rearrange their life in such a way that they can continue to use, and that's the most important thing to them, then again, this is a sign of addiction. Another thing that that alcoholics and addicts do is they want to maintain a good supply. Now, a drinker is going to want, if they drink beer, they may have a couple cases laying around. If I've heard wine drinkers, and I've seen some wine drinkers that once upon a time they were drinking these, 81 Kendall Jackson, this or whatever, nice wine, and they graduate to these boxed wines where you get, 2 gallons of wine for $3 or $4. At a certain point, it doesn't really matter as long as it has alcohol content. But maintaining a supply of that which you need, because an addict really does need their substance to maintain their life the way it is, even if it's going downhill. It's something that we need or feel like we need, and we're going to obsess over. So making sure that we have this is important. This is where people will lie, they'll cheat, they'll steal, they'll borrow money, they'll pawn things, they will take a title loan on a car. Essentially, if you don't have what you need as an addict and you want to get it, you're going to do whatever it takes. And this often means that certain bills will go unpaid. I've seen it happen, and I know it's common. People will get their drugs or alcohol before they'll pay the cable bill or the water bill or whatever. It begins to take precedence. So when the supply and the opportunity to use becomes greater than all other things, this is again a sign of an addiction. Also, people take different risks. When we're under the influence of drugs and alcohol, we will do things and say things and go places we otherwise wouldn't go. And I'm sure most people, if they went to college or when they were younger, they saw this. They would go to a party and maybe were experimenting, and they would drink a few beers, and all of a sudden they would feel loose and more open and would end up doing something otherwise they wouldn't do. So into adulthood and into long-term addiction, this becomes quite a frequent occurrence, is that we take risks that we otherwise would not take. I suspect that I actually drove under the influence of alcohol probably hundreds of times when I was younger, especially at college, where there was a bar at night and would go there and back. And, for the grace of God, I've never hurt anyone or hurt anyone myself. But at the time, I thought that this is just, this is really no big deal. I'm just fine. Another problem the addicts have is dealing with their problems appropriately. They tend to blow things up, create huge resentments, look for negative things around them to divert attention off of themselves. And in a lot of cases where they have problems or responsibilities, they will just ignore them or put them off because they're too difficult to deal with. Another thing that addicts usually face is that they have a lot of consequences around them, and so they may change friends, they may move, they may change jobs, change their telephone number, all of a sudden disappear, and then come back later on. The ability to deal with problems in a productive way, in a responsible way, goes out the door with addiction. And folks, the reason I'm talking about all these things is that first, in order for someone to get help, they need to identify that there is in fact a problem. And one of the most common things among addicts is that of denial. That, look, I really don't have a problem. I can control it. I can stop any time that I want. And there's a process of rationalizing. Is that, you know what? Well, this person over here, they're doing something much worse than I, and mine isn't that big of a deal, so it's going to be just fine. Or justifying. Something bad happened to me recently, or when I was a child, or something bad is happening right now. And because this is so bad and this makes me feel so badly, I need to use in order to cope with this. Things that were once important are not so important anymore. Because, again, this denial says, look, the drugs and alcohol are more important than everything else. And so in order for anybody to get help, they need to first understand that the addict creates specific delusions in their life, that this isn't as bad as it is and everything is just fine. But the fact is that the negative consequences are rising up all around them. When an addict gets under stress and pressure, they tend to consume more. And by consuming more alcohol, drugs, and by participating in risky activities that drugs and alcohol take us there, this excess consumption and really tying one on or getting extremely loaded or getting baked, or whatever the terminology, it kind of changes from generation to generation. But it's at these moments where he says, look, I'm not even going to try and control it right now. I'm just going to really let it go. That's when some really, really dangerous and difficult things can happen. The prisons are I've heard it said that 90% of people in prison were under the influence of drugs and alcohol when they committed their crime. And I'm sure that those people now, as they're sitting there looking back, the drugs and alcohol and excess consumption was something that led them, in many cases, to the decisions they made, the criminal activities. I already mentioned a little bit about dropping hobbies and activities or even changing them. I remember when I was younger in college, I liked to play pool. And then when I turned 21, I said, this is going to be great, and go to the pubs and the bars and play pool. But over time, it ended up that playing pool was the secondary reason for going there. It became drinking was the primary reason. And my pool game, I thought, was pretty good. It got worse and worse in reality, although in my mind, I probably thought that I was playing better. Have you ever heard someone, I hear this on the golf course all the time, people will say, I play better when I'm drunk. And, I really don't think that that's true. I think maybe they think they're playing better. But I played a lot of golf in the past with people that are under the influence of alcohol and drugs. And maybe they think that they're playing like Rory McIlroy or Jordan Spieth or Tiger Woods, but it's actually more like John Daly when he's drinking more beer than burritos. Okay. Another thing that you may see, particularly if you have a loved one that struggles from an addiction problem, is that they have stashes, and they have stashes all over the place. And so you may, maybe you have a child that, maybe an adolescent child that you suspect has been smoking marijuana, for example, and you're starting to notice lighters in their jeans or burn marks in different places, different containers in the garage, things like that. There are many different things that you can find, and that stashes of alcohol, stashes of drugs, going back to that good supply, is one of the most important things to someone who is addicted. One of the other things that happens, particularly I believe with people who are trying to stop, trying to control their disease, the disease of addiction, and they may go a short period of time or maybe even a few months. I've heard people even going a couple years without using their substance, but then when they go back to it, they can really overdo it, and so they take a large amount, and this can be very dangerous. In the case of someone who has been addicted to heroin, as an example, and their tolerance went up and up as they continue to use, they need more of the drug to get the same high. But if a heroin user needs X to get high after a period of time, and then they stop, and then say several months later they begin to use again, and they think that they can take the same dose they did when they last used, oftentimes this produces an overdose and death. And this is very common in the intravenous drug world, is that when people have had a break from it, and whether it be heroin, crack, meth, these types of things that people inject after a time, and they then inject what they think they can handle, and they in fact cannot. It can create very difficult problems for them. Another issue that addicts have are problems with the law, driving under the influence. You see public intoxication. The overwhelming majority of domestic violence cases are the drugs and alcohol are involved. All you have to do is watch a Cops episode and take a look at what's going on. And almost every time someone is drunk or they're high. And so, and I know hundreds of people that I've met over the years that as a result of their using, they've got in trouble with the law. And this is something that can give them a little bit of motivation, sometimes a lot of motivation to try and change their life and get into it. But what happens is that if we're just using our own self-will, if we're just getting ourselves psyched up and saying, you know what, I'm going to beat this, I'm not going to do this anymore. True addicts, alcoholics have said this hundreds of times, and the fact is that we always scratch our head at the end of the day or end of a period of time and saying, here, I got right back to doing again the things that I didn't want to do. And so what we've talked about here so far today is some of the signs and symptoms of addiction. When we come back in a moment, we're going to talk about, start to get into some of the solutions as we further identify the problem. I want to let everyone know that if you do have a problem with drug and alcohol or have a loved one that has a problem with drug and alcohol, you can certainly call us, Renaissance Recovery Center, at 480-632-1345, and we will assist you in any way we can to get the help that you need.
You're listening to SOAR on the Recovery Star Worldwide Network. We'll be back after this. Addiction, recovery, and a place to talk about it all. RecoveryStarWorldwide.com. Listen live or on demand anytime you want.
It's easy hiding my heroin habit from my parents. If I'm tired or don't eat, I'm just acting like a typical kid. I hide my stash in my room because I know my parents would never snoop. They don't notice the missing painkillers either, or the money I take from their wallets, but I think they're gonna notice this.
I'm Nassau County District Attorney Kathleen Rice. Would you know if your child was using heroin? To learn more, please visit heroinprevention.com.
Every 30 minutes, another innocent person is killed due to a drunk driver.
My best friend.
My brother.
My poor grandchild.
My sister.
My father.
My husband.
My mom. My mommy.
Well, I've been afraid of changing, 'cause I've built my life around you.
Stop these tragedies before they happen. Don't drink and drive.
Welcome back to the series on addiction recovery. My name is Mike Jensen, and we are Renaissance Recovery Center. The executive director and clinical director, Steve Brown, is out today. I want to give a shout out to him and his wife as it's her birthday. Also, I want to make mention of our counseling director, Lindsay Greenman. She's well known in the Valley, and we're very proud to have her as a significant part of our intensive outpatient program, and particularly with our one-on-one counseling that we do with all of our clients. In the first segment, the goal was to identify what some of the signs and symptoms of addiction are, and we went through quite a lot of them. And just to recap, someone who starts and can't stop, that suffers withdrawal when they do stop. The withdrawal is painful. Because the painful is withdrawal, they desire to use more, and thus begins this cycle of addiction. That certain problems, consequences, health issues may come up, but they're not enough to deter them. to change their habits and to seek help for their addiction. Many of their social, recreational, their hobbies, they begin to change as they either become too dysfunctional to perform them, or they feel embarrassed because they're high and they're maybe feeling out of control or don't want to appear out of control. Maintaining a supply of the substance, whether drugs or alcohol, becomes very important. People then begin to take risks, both to get what they need and also under the influence begin to do things that they otherwise would not do. Dealing with problems in a productive way becomes something increasingly difficult, and people begin to reprioritize things that are important in their lives. Things that were once important, they assign a less important value to them. It enables them to not deal with them or brush them off without feeling too guilty and shameful. Guilt and shame, by the way, are companions of someone who is addicted, and these are usually very driving forces as to what their behavior is. Guilt and shame usually drive people further into addiction. You might think it was the opposite, that because they do something, it makes them feel badly as they hurt others and themselves and have negative consequences, that in and of itself would be enough for people to change and try and get a hold of their addiction and get into recovery. Unfortunately, that is just not the case in most of the time. People began to use in secrecy and in solitude. They began to isolate more. People can spend hours, even days, by themselves as long as they have their drink or their drug, away from everything. They begin to deny, rationalize, justify. The use begins to increase more and more. They have stashes, and if they go any periods of time where they are unable to use, when they begin to use, they will use large amounts, which increases the risk of overdose or becoming sick, and even death. And last, we discussed having problems with the law, and that I believe, and I've read some of this, but don't know exactly the statistics, but that the majority of people who are imprisoned or get in trouble with the law are under the influence of drugs or alcohol. So 10 years ago, I wrote this little diagram as I was working on my recovery and as I was trying to make sense of my life. I was very conflicted as an alcoholic. I did not like being an alcoholic. I didn't like that I felt like I existed in two persons. There was the person that I really was, the things I was doing, drinking, making decisions that I would later regret, a lot of stress, a lot of things going on. And then there was a person I felt that I could be, or the person inside, which I esteemed myself to be someone who was loving and compassionate, who was responsible, who had things to offer to the world and to people. And being an alcoholic, as time went on, the alcohol became the most important thing, and it literally took over my life. This is what addiction is, and I know that people can understand this. I know that if you have a loved one who is suffering from an addiction, that it is such an overwhelming, hopeless feeling. We've tried to talk to them and wept and cried, and maybe you've prayed 100 times that something would happen, yet often nothing does happen. And the reason is that addiction being a disease of the mind, a disease of the body, and there are many components to this, but it's the most interesting disease in the world, because the prescription to put it into remission, it begins with the addict saying, I need help. I cannot do this myself. That these drugs, this alcohol has a hold on me that is so significant, so tight, that unless I first admit this and get into a position with the right people to get some help and some support, that I can't do it. And this happens over and over again until people do get the help. Oftentimes people get help and they do good for a period of time, and then they regress and they go back to it. And that's usually because when every addict enters into recovery, they're learning new systems, new coping skills, new ways to deal with life. Hopefully they're getting doses of reality. as to what's true and what's not true. The addict has a hard time determining what is true and what is false oftentimes, because the chemicals in the mind and the inebriation of drugs and alcohol, they affect everything right down to our thinking and how we view things. And so our perspectives can become very skewed. And so what's important for us all to understand is that any addict, I believe, can recover if they have the desire to do so, and if they're willing to begin to listen to some people who have been through this before, have been through the pains of addiction and into the greatness of recovery. And Renaissance Recovery Center, Steve and I are both recovering alcoholics and addicts. We used different things during our period of time, but today our lives are completely different because we entered recovery and have found a way to live today without the need for any drugs or alcohol. And this is something that can happen for everyone. But a few more things about the addict and changes that need to be made. And by the way, these are all things that we teach people, that we discuss, we help people to understand in our intensive outpatient program. But let's talk about the physical body. Discussed earlier that if an alcoholic takes a drink, then physically that body craves a drink. So it's not just in your mind, it's your body is asking for a drink. That is very much the same with drugs. Cocaine is a great example. If a cocaine user would snort some lines of cocaine, and then after a period of time, the body wants more, and so there would be an intense desire to use. So I think all of us, we probably have some understanding of the physical pull of drugs and alcohol. Once an addict has it inside them, then physically they're going to require more. But what happens to someone who has drank alcohol for several decades, 3 or 4 decades, or used drugs and hardcore drugs even for a couple of years? What happens to our bodies? They change. They get physically broken down. And any attempt at recovery, people are going to need to look at what damage has been done to them physically. So we advocate that people have a physician, they have a doctor, that they go through physicals, and we discuss this with people to help them understand that for a period of time they may need to take certain minerals, vitamins, these types of things to help get their body restored. But it's something that your personal physician, that everyone seeking recovery should do, is see their personal physician, get a physical, and see what damage, if any, has been done to their body. Another component of addiction and recovery are our emotions. One of the interesting things about using is oftentimes negative emotions or even positive emotions drive someone to want to use alcohol. If it's negative, they may say, I'm going to go get drunk and forget all this stuff. At the end of the day, if it's been a little bit stressful, let's say I'm going to have a drink and take the edge off. If something great happens, hey, let's go celebrate and let's party. And so what alcohol in particular does, and drugs also, but they enhance our emotional state. They can do that. If we're happy, it can make us happier. If we're sad, it can make us sadder. Or they can change it entirely. If we're sad, it can make us feel like we're happy. You see what I mean? So they really change a lot of things here. But the issue is when we're using substances to control or enhance our emotions, our feelings become synthetic in a way. They're not real. And suppose for a minute that your life has been tough and you have it's just been hard, and just the situations of your life has been very difficult, and you learn that you can take a drink or a drug, and all of a sudden, instead of feeling as badly as you do, you feel like $1 million. And every day goes by and you generally just don't feel good. If I take a drink or drug, I'm going to feel great. Well, what would most people do? Most people will use. The problem is that there's a huge issue with the premise to this, is that drugs and alcohol will make me feel happy, make me feel good. This is a great lie. Perhaps at the beginning it does a little bit. Perhaps at the beginning you feel intense euphoria and feel good. But as time goes on, and as you continue to chase this feeling and get it in a very easy way of taking a drink or smoking or injecting or snorting, what happens over time is that it takes more and more of the substance to get you high, but then the high becomes different, and it becomes one of rather than feeling good, of trying to maintain a feeling and trying to avoid withdrawal. In essence, it becomes a hell. So our emotions are usually very much out of whack, and we cannot cope well as life brings us when we're using substances, because we will go to them instead of coping with them in a positive way. Socially and environmentally, this is a huge. Drugs and alcohol have a huge impact on us socially and in our environment, where we hang out at, where we go. It is true, we all heard the adage that misery loves company, even though most people who, or maybe not most, but some who are miserable don't even know that they're miserable. But consider for a moment, for me, during college and even after, the place I felt most comfortable was at the bar. And so, because I liked to drink and it was acceptable there, I could go into the bars and I could drink, and nobody was going to say, hey, why don't you slow down? Hey, why don't... No, I was there drinking, they were there drinking. And so my social activities began to change to where if I was going to do something which was going to be fun or something that I had a choice to do, there needed to be alcohol there. And so that became a qualification of almost anything I did. And so what that meant is that I wasn't hanging out at church on Friday night. I wasn't going bowling with my cousins. I wasn't doing these things. There always had to be alcohol. And for the drug user, it's similar. Addiction is all the same, regardless of what we use. Is that once it has its hands around our necks, or it has the chain around our ankles with 1,000-pound weight tied to it, it absolutely controls every aspect of our lives. And I don't really know if there's anything more important that I could say than this, is that drugs and alcohol and addiction control every aspect of our lives. And that means it's not, we don't just, the things we do not just affect us, they affect the people that love us, our families. If we're younger, our parents, our siblings. If we're older, our children. It affects our jobs. It affects everything, and in a negative way. And the biggest head scratcher for people that I've seen that do not understand that addiction is a disease of the body and an illness of the mind is they just don't understand at all how people can continue to do something with such negative consequences. Yet the addict sees no other way to live. And so it becomes a very scary proposition. Money, financial, using drugs or being an alcoholic has a huge financial strain on anyone, whether it be because you're going to bars and drinking, or if you're buying your illicit drugs, and then time lost in using. That we otherwise could be making money or days off at work, whatnot. I mean, the point here is that if someone is addicted financially, usually it's going to be a big strain on them. And of course, spiritually, we talk about each person has a mind, a body, and a soul. And things of any spiritual nature, which in my thinking comprise of being empathetic, being compassionate, being service-oriented, getting outside of myself to help other people, thinking and doing things that are aimed at just a higher level of being that kind of is more than just being a selfish person. Because I've seen a great paradox in recovery, and that is that whatever I want in life, if I give it away, I'll receive it. If I want to be recovered from a hopeless state of my mind and my body because of my alcoholism, if I want to stay sober, one of the most important things I can do is help somebody else stay sober. And along those same lines, if I want to be trusted, then I must trust. If I want to love, then I must love. If I want people to be kind to me, I need to be kind to them back. And that's one of the great things about recovery, and something that we see at Renaissance Recovery Center with our clients as they come in and as they graduate, is that the selfishness and self-centeredness of being an addiction is so prevalent. Once we get a little bit of time away from the drink or drug, and the body begins to heal and the mind begins to clear, and then the spirit becomes more prevalent, spiritual things in our lives, that our happiness returns. And that we begin to see that life is just not about me. It's not about me getting loaded or me feeling good or me being captive to an addiction. That's not life at all. And it's a very hellish way to live, in fact. So the addiction and recovery both focus on spiritual things, financial, physical, emotional, biological, psychological, social, and environmental. And any recovery program, any recovery plan needs to focus on each one of these things individually, and it needs to be done diligently, but also needs to be done over time. As you can imagine, as you listen to this, there's so much information, and recovery is not an event. It's not something that somebody goes to a program or they learn something and all of a sudden everything is all better and their lives have changed. What they do is they learn particular processes, they learn skills, coping skills, they learn new ways to manage their life in a way to help them to be who they can truly be, instead of being captive to the person who is suffering from addiction. So again, this is Mike Jensen here for Steve Brown, who is out today. If you'd like to talk to us at Renaissance Recovery Center, we can help you in any way we can. Phone number is 480-632-1345, or visit us online at renaissancerecoverycenter.com. Be back in a moment.
You're listening to SOAR on the Recovery Star Worldwide Network. We'll be back after this. Real recovery, real solutions. Recovery Talk on demand. RecoveryStarWorldwide.com. It's time.
We'll be home later. Be good, guys.
Okay, we will. Don't worry, Mrs. Jones.
Okay, bye.
So, what do you want to do? Well, I found these pills in my mom's medicine cabinet. Want some? Sure. What's the worst that could happen? No, wait, that's too much.
I'm so sorry. There's nothing more we can do.
Be aware. Don't share. Lock your meds.
This message brought to you by Ulcer Prevention Council.
Welcome back to Renaissance Recovery Center's SOAR, our series on addiction recovery. Today, we are talking about the signs and symptoms of addiction. Also, we're talking about some of the parts of the whole of a human being that need to be focused on. And what I mean by that is we have a spiritual presence about us. We have financial, physical, emotional, biological, psychological, social, and environmental issues. All these things our using has an effect upon all of them, as does our recovery. And each of these areas is something that needs focus as we try to move from addicted to a person in recovery. I want to just reemphasize again that it is very rare that someone who is substantially addicted is able to change and pull out by themselves, by sheer self-will, or by creating a code of morals or a better philosophy of life, or even by having great knowledge regarding addiction. But we need help. We need someone some people, some groups, and in many cases we need treatment, depending upon how deep we've got into addiction or how many times we've tried to stop and start. And there are resources available. In our program, it's an intensive outpatient program, and essentially it's 10 hours a week in class and another hour individual one-on-one, where we're helping you specifically to deal with the things that you need to deal with to help you to get to the place that you want to get to. So as I mentioned earlier, both Steve and I are in recovery, and I want to talk a little bit about how I see my recovery and how it happened. And it's for me, it kind of makes a lot of sense today. It did not for a long time. But essentially, alcohol for me was a power that was a formidable power in my life. When I was much younger in high school, and we kind of moved around a lot as a kid, as my dad was ascending the corporate ladder, I found as a teenager in Southern California, in a school of 6,000 kids, that if I drank alcohol and went to a party on the weekends, I could open up, I could feel part of, and I wasn't so insecure, and the social anxiety, it kind of dissipated. So I learned in my formidable years that alcohol is a great power, and it was something that if I used it properly, that it could be this magic elixir to enhance my life. And that's how I viewed it from the beginning. And I held on to that idea for many years after that, even as it began to fail me, as I would call on it for help to lift me up or to take the stress away. Over time, it did not do that. Over time, it began to produce much more negative consequences. I began to be unhappy, depressed, and got to a place where I felt that I really couldn't live with alcohol, or I couldn't live without it. You know, that kind of a catch-22 scenario in your mind, and that's a very dark place to be. It's a state of depression. Well, in my case, I approached recovery from an intellectual standpoint for many years, and I thought, for example, one time I thought, alcohol is processed through the liver, so I'm going to study the liver. I'm going to find out how to make the healthiest, most effective liver in the world by taking supplements. So I came up with a list of certain vitamins and certain minerals, and even some Chinese medicine and things like this that were all designed in my mind. I'm like, I'm just going to have the greatest liver so I can drink, it can process it, and that will solve my problem. Well, it didn't work, but I put time and energy into that. I did a lot of things in my life to try and overcome that all failed. The one thing that finally did work is I realized one day is that alcohol and drugs, anything that would keep me from being sober, that these things were huge stumbling blocks. They were encumbrances in my life, that I realized that if I chose to continue to try and partner with them in my life, that I never was going to achieve the things I wanted to. The trend in my life had already been things were going downhill. It was leading to more depression rather than any feeling of optimization in anything, any good feelings, any powerful feelings. I just was feeling more and more controlled by alcohol. And I finally realized, this has such a power over me, and my life is such a mess as a result of it, that I need to reach out and I need to get some help. And I did that. And when I reached out and got help, I learned right away that I was not alone, that there were many people who felt exactly like I felt. I mean, exactly. I would sit and I would listen to people, and they would tell their stories, and I would say, this is unbelievable. I could say the exact same thing. So one of the first things that helped me to overcome was that I got around people who had been where I was, yet had basically found recovery. And I learned that alcohol and drugs were a power greater than me, and that in order to combat this, I needed to find a power that was greater than that power. And that meant that it was through a spiritual means. But also, I found that the power of several alcoholics sitting together in a room and talking and sharing their experience, strength, and hope, that was something that was more powerful than alcohol. And that if I could just stay around these people enough on a daily basis, that perhaps this can help me to overcome. And you know what? It did. And so as I got a little more time away from the drinking physically, and as my mind began to clear, as I spoke of earlier, some spiritual things began to open up in me, and I began to be less concerned about myself and more about others. I wanted to make up for all the times I put my family and loved ones through hell, and I wanted them to be proud of me again. I wanted to be esteemed as someone who was trustworthy, and this took time to build. But basically what happened is that I bought into the idea that recovery is possible. I got around people who were doing the deal, that they turned their lives around. And so as I did this and began to feel confident that I could in fact stay sober, then I had a mentor that helped me look at my life, look at my past, and try and determine certain threads of behavior, of thinking in my life that led me to bad decisions or things I felt guilt or shame from. And so I went and discussed all these things and discussed these parts about me that I didn't like, that produced negative things in my life. And so we talked about these things, we worked on these things, and I got to a point where I began to believe in God again. And so I asked God for his help, and as I did that, I began to feel stronger and stronger and gain some momentum in my recovery. After I was sober for a few months, it began to bother me a little bit about the people that I hurt in the past, and I wanted to make up for that. And so I began to go to people and ask for their forgiveness. And many were skeptical for a while because I'd only been sober for a little bit of time. But today, those people that were once skeptical are now they now believe. In fact, they would be surprised if I drank today because my life has turned around. So once I went to these people and asked for forgiveness, and another point of this was to try and clear out the guilt and shame. Because I wasn't using anymore, I wasn't producing more crap on my pile of crap, if that makes sense. Things were starting to get better. And so once I kind of did this, was around the right people, understood recovery was possible, began to get more in touch with my spiritual roots, then all I had to do was maintain and continue to do the things I needed to do on a daily basis. And what that means is that there are certain people, places, and things that I won't go unless I have a good reason to be there. I have surrounded myself with people in recovery who, there's a metaphor that we talk about that we feel like we were rescued from a sinking ship. Had I continued drinking, I would have gone down with that ship and would be at the bottom of the ocean. But we were rescued. So in my life now are people that have found a solution, and we do this together. And what we do is we try and help other people that have been there. Once you have recovered from addiction and got on the other side and begin to live in recovery and begin to see that life is something that can be absolutely enjoyed and loved, and that people like being around you, that they're not scared of you or what you're going to do, you never want to go back to that. And I think in essence at Renaissance Recovery Center, that is one of the things that's a primary message is we want our potential clients to know, or if you are hurting in your addiction, that if you call us and we'll talk with you, we can help you to define a program, whether it is within our intensive outpatient or another means, to help you to move from the hell and pains of addiction into the happiness, the joy, and the freedom of recovery. You can reach us at 480-632-1345. Again, 480-632-1345. Online at renaissancerecoverycenter.com. And really hope that you got something out of this today, and look forward to hearing from you. Again, this is Mike Jensen here for Steve Brown, who is out today, and you've been listening to the series on addiction recovery, SOAR, by Renaissance Recovery Center.
lights will guide